welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about, kind of the topic that's all that you see on the news in Canada or the U.S. It is the U.S. election. We're going to talk about, in particular, the impacts it could have on agriculture depending on who wins this two-legged horse race. And today's guest is Jim Wiesemeyerof of Pro Farmer. Let's bring him in here. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Always good to be on your show, Shaun.
Hey, man, looking forward to chatting, Jim. We have a good. I think we have so much fun on AgriTalk on Fridays, where we get a chance to discuss on the free for all the big issues of the week. It kind of is one of my highlights of the week, and we've been doing it. I've been on the show. You've been on a lot longer than I have, but I think it's almost like 2 years now, or maybe 2.5. It is. It's a lot of fun.
It's fun. It's fun. I hope it continues a long time.
Me too. Okay, Jim, audience, if anybody has a question or a comment to ask of Jim Wiesemeyerof of Pro Farmer, our guest today, all you have to do is enter it in the box, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch. We love to have audience participation. Jim, I guess off the top, the president has spent the weekend in Walter Reed Hospital. Does him getting COVID and does it have any impact at all on the results of this election?
Well, on what I would say a normal president, and I always respect the presidency, a normal president, I think it would. With Trump, you always have to question everything. So I'm not quite sure that he'll get a bump out of that.
Yeah, it's really difficult to get kind of your head wrapped around, him and COVID, right? He has spent so much time kind of dismissing it, hey, we'll move past it, trying to give people some confidence. And if you're on the other side, people have taken it as, he doesn't care and he thinks it makes him look bad. Probably at the end of the day, if people's opinions are just as cemented as they ever were. Is that probably the best way to look at it?
Yeah, it's washed out. He frequently, waters down any potential pluses. Like today, he tweeted that don't be afraid of COVID. He hasn't felt this good in 20 years, and by saying don't be afraid of COVID, that gives the signal that look at all those families of which over 200,000 Americans have died. And it's not the right signal to give. That's my personal, perspective. Now, I think he's done a lot of things good from a policy perspective, but a lot remains to acknowledge in his other areas.
Are we going to see another debate, do you think?
It depends on his health and what kind. I think it could be a virtual, debate, because depending on how the tests run after he says he's going to be back at the White House under doctor's care later this evening. But he's still in that critical area of the COVID after you get it. So I think it's a jump ball on that. Number one, whether it'll happen, and number two, in what format, Shaun.
The first one was so good, Jim. How could we be denied part 2 and 3?
Entertainment, if that. I saw one focus group interview, it was on Fox, that said 1/3 of the audience thought Biden won, 1/3 thought Trump won, and 1/3 were disgusted. And a lot of people were in that disgusted area.
So ag wasn't really mentioned in the first debate. Renewable fuels did get a mention, but I thought kind of both candidates missed an opportunity in the climate section to throw it a bone and say, corn-based ethanol as an example. Will we hear any ag, if the other debates happen, will we hear any ag topics discussed?
Well, if they're smart, they would. And I say that because if this election is close on the presidential race, and it looks like, even though current polls are showing Biden up, I know the NBC Wall Street Journal poll showed Biden up 14 points, but it's going to narrow again. But the electoral states, those swing states, the northern tier states, of which farming is very critical. That's why you have to address the issues, renewable fuels, trade, and stuff like that. So I think they would be remiss if they don't, Shaun.
Yeah, we've got some tight races in some of these ag states. One of them in particular, Colin Peterson, Minnesota, he's in a tight one.
Yeah, I did a lot of research last week on it, manning the phones, calling Minnesota people, because, frankly, I don't trust a lot of the national polls after 2016. I really think they have to prove themselves again. So I just don't, I got to look at them, but I don't trust them. But boy, Minnesota people are telling me that Colin Peterson, who is a good foreign policy person, I mean, he's forgotten more than a lot of people know on foreign policy, and he's very good on corn-based ethanol. He's like almost an expert in that. But the Minnesota people I contacted, both parties, said he's in trouble. And the reason, Shaun, is for the first time, he's got really a formidable candidate in Michelle Fischbach. She was a long time in the legislature there, used to be lieutenant governor. Now, Colin is far more articulate in the ag policy area, but she knows her stuff on a potpourri of issues that's important to the state of Minnesota. Plus, she has raised more funds than Colin, and that caught my eye there.
So much of this is about raising money, isn't it? And surprisingly, Biden has really he is out revenued, I guess, Trump. I can't believe how short of money the Trump campaign is.
Well, you may not be enthusiastic for the candidate, but you're enthusiastic to throw money at defeating Trump. That's what it tells me. But another thing on Colin Peterson is that Trump's on the ticket, and I think that's a negative for Colin, because Trump's going to bring out new voters that normally do not vote, that definitely did not vote in Minnesota in 2018. But when I talk with the expert analysts for elections, who were mostly, if not all, wrong in 2016, they've told me in the past, and I personally believe it, in close Senate races, whoever wins the White House, typically that Senate race also goes to the same party. So in the case of Iowa, with Senator Ernst, Republican, in a very close race, with the Democrat, that could be key. That could swing that Republican-held seat vote to Teresa Greenfield, who is the Democratic candidate. Same thing in Montana. Same thing in South Carolina. So, we're seeing a number of very close races that we will not know, probably even on election night, depending on how many, mail votes there are.
Cory Gardner from Colorado, another one. Hey,
yeah, he is.
So, Jim, on when we're going to know, any update as you talk to some of your Washington insiders on when we'll actually know the result of this election?
Well, it depends on whether or not it's close. That's number one, because if there's a groundswell, if it's a wave type election, that the polls are not signaling right now. But if it's a wave election, it doesn't matter. But if it's close, I think we're talking several weeks. Hopefully it's not beyond that. But there are legitimate people saying it could be over a month. And that raises all sorts of issues. Court test, you can imagine. Trump is signaling that's why he wants the Supreme Court to have 9 justices rather than 8, because if it were to go to the Supreme Court, he wants that 9th, justice on the court.
What kind of impact is there on the market, say the U.S. dollar, if we have to wait 1 to 2 months to know the result?
Well, uncertainty is usually always negative, always negative, I would say, to markets. However, I would say, again, in my research, I think the market's gotten too nervous about a Biden victory relative to the economy, Shaun. And I say that because he's going to throw $4 trillion at this marketplace through his tax increases on people making $400,000 or more. There's far more people under that than over that. So I think the market's getting ahead of themselves in the financial markets and the equity markets by saying for sure Biden's going to be bad for the economy. I think he's going to stimulate the economy if he were to be president, at least the first year, and then we're going to have to worry about deficits and debt.
Yeah, it wasn't, I think Goldman Sachs was out this morning saying that they expect a little bit calmer trade policy, and it was kind of a little bit more friendly on the economic side to Biden if he is elected.
Yeah, well, but if it does dip, again, I can't give overt advice. I'm a policy outlook person, not an outlook person. So when a policy analyst gives market recommendations, look out. It's not outlook. But I would buy the dip if it goes down significantly, because remember when Trump won,
Yeah.
the world was going to come to an end.
Yeah.
If you bought the dip, you made a lot of money.
You did very well. The question here about the ad hoc payments, MFP, CFAP. Lindsay asks, what impact do you think the U.S. ad hoc payments are having on the grain markets, and maybe how farmers are marketing their grain? Any insight there, Jim?
Well, yeah, I think several impacts. Number one, the overall arching thing is that number one, they're needed. They're definitely not a bailout. I would never, even the Canadian payments that your government pays to Canadians, I would never call them bailout, because not with the income situation the way it is now. We've got a working capital that a farmer really needs. That's called cash flow. It's down 85% from the peak in 2012. Now, does it signal some farmers are better able to hold the commodity? Absolutely. So I think this has led to tighter cash markets, a firmer basis, I would say, than normally you would have seen. But this income is needed. What farmers, when I'm out, well, now when I'm speaking virtually now,
Yeah.
are with a lot of emails from Pro Farmer members, I usually get the question, how long can this last? Because they're needing continued income transfer payments, and I just tell them the verdict is still out on that. I think it's not going to be nearly as easy after the elections are known to get these huge multi-billion-dollar payments than what we've seen with the trade mitigation program, CFAP 1, CFAP 2, WHIP Plus, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, and Jim Hale, who farms in Saskatchewan, has a question. How bad would the U.S. farm economy be without those payments?
It would be devastating. Yeah, we would see shades of the impact, although it's not as bad as the 1980s. Look, when you add up all these income transfers that I like to call taxpayer payments, they're not government payments, they're taxpayer payments, it adds up to about $50 billion. I mean, and for the future, Shaun, that's going to be a high anxiety, because when we write the next farm bill, all those payments are not in the budget baseline. They're ad hoc payments. I don't want to get too wonky on your audience, but if you think about it, this is just through the okay of lawmakers and the administration. In a farm bill, you have a baseline that tells you how much you can spend, and that's based on the past budgets. But this is outside the budget. And so if we don't get a turnaround in real cash prices, we're going to, I would not want to be a House or Senate Ag Committee chairman, I'll tell you that.
I hear you. So what are both candidates kind of promising to agriculture to prevent having to do those payments in the future? Is Trump is he planning on doing anything different from what you've heard? And what about Biden? What does his rural plan look like?
Okay, Trump, by not detailing hardly at all what he would do the next 4 years, that tells me it's going to be the status quo. And that doesn't mean it's not going to be good for farmers. He would continue to reduce the albatross of unfunded mandates through regulation. He would knock down even more regulations. He would continue his trade policy to be very aggressive, more for the U.S.-centric trade policy with bustle behind it. Knowing Trump, he's not really a conservative. He's more of a libertarian. So I think he would be more than willing to probably to at least work with Congress for some additional income transfer payments. But his own party, I think, would fight him on that. Now, in the case of Biden, you would see a pretty significant shift toward the focus of the ag community to more to the smaller to medium-sized producer, because historically that's what the Democratic Party does. And they would definitely focus on food and nutrition programs, additional the food stamp funding, the SNAP funding, less requirements to qualify. And on the trade policy, I don't see much difference between Biden and Trump other than the style in which you do it. I think he's going to let trade policy alone for 1 year. Because he's got things like climate change, infrastructure, and healthcare that he'll want to focus on the first year or two.
Yeah. I think on the China thing, I think there's just that's where the two parties just so connect. I think it's just like you said, it's how the message is conveyed, not necessarily what the talking points are. They're pretty similar.
Yes, and we'll look to see who if it is Biden. I know in the U.S. when we talk about this, you'll always have to condition if he were the president, and Trump still has a chance because you get a lot of emails if you don't. Okay, but if Biden is president, look to see who his State Department secretary is, because that'll give initial signals of diplomacy or what kind of style. It's just like we're going to look very closely, again, if Biden's president, who is his Environmental Protection Agency administrator, and is he going to have a climate czar in the White House, which we're told that he will. That'll tell you the focus of any Biden administration.
Yeah, I got a comment here from Bill, and I'm just going to put it on the screen here. In regards to Biden, talking about and Biden's going to end animal agriculture. I thought it was pretty significant at the debate that Biden tried to separate himself from the Green New Deal. Do you agree?
Yes, he's separate. But again, I think his biggest problem, if he is president, will be the far left people in his own party.
Yeah.
And so just think about it. If the Democrats have what we call a trifecta, if they win the White House, if they keep control of the House, and if they regain control of the Senate, that's when you would have substantial changes under a host of issues in America: economic policy, tax policy, trade policy to a degree later on, but health care, and of course climate change, because they can do what they want, especially if they do away with the 60-vote filibuster. And again, if they stack or if they pack the Supreme Court, and they'll be able to if they win all three.
Yeah, leading into the first debate, a lot of Democrats were super worried about Biden. Would he perform? Would he show people that he can do this job, and he can participate in the debate with a quick-witted President Trump? Biden did okay. I'm based on how he tried to separate himself a little bit here from some of the far left in his party. I wonder if this is now a trap set for Kamala Harris, and do Democrats have to worry about her? And when she's asked questions like, what do you think about the Green New Deal, and she doesn't answer in line with Biden potentially, does that hurt Biden? It's going to be interesting.
I think it could. Usually a vice presidential candidate can hurt you. They can't help you. There are exceptions. President Lyndon Johnson, before he became president, definitely helped President Kennedy become president because he made him amenable to the Southern voter. But I think you ask an excellent question there. So you think that she would be schooled for that, but she's been pretty aggressive when she's spoken to the press. She hasn't spoken that frequently. You learn in debate school, I was a debater in college, to let your opponent talk, because people will typically get themselves in trouble. That's Trump 101. But that's Biden 202. And one of the faults of the initial debate for president was that Trump always interjected and did not allow Biden the time to foul up. So I think it was a strategic debating error that it let him capsulize what he wanted to say. So I don't think Mike Pence will do that. I think that he's a gentleman in that regard. And number two, I think he wants to hear definitely her entire positions on some sensitive issues.
Yeah, we could see the reverse where Pence just stands there. It's like, oh no, keep going. No, keep going. I'll take my turn later. Just keep going.
Absolutely. But the issues I think are going to be aired out at the vice presidential, debate, where they really weren't in the first presidential contest. Now, a town hall one, if it comes off in Miami, I think that'll be a better format, because I don't think you want to cut off a person who's asking questions. So we're going to see.
And President Trump's not necessarily losing ground in some of those rural areas, is he? What's the latest polling you've seen on that matter?
He is not. He's still rock solid in the rural area, and really in those swing states. When you look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, he's within the margin of error in a number, if not all, of those states. And now, again, to win again, you almost have to deal to an inside straight. It's going to be difficult. He did that in 2016. He's going to need a similar type of strategy for this year. This is why I think, well, the White House people tell me he's going after the Minnesota vote, because that's 10 electoral votes. Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes. If he loses Wisconsin but gains Minnesota, that's a wash. So I think they're looking at the electoral votes as far as their strategy. Arizona is going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight, and so is Pennsylvania. I think it'll come down to those, two states myself.
Which is, if memory serves me correctly, at the Republican National Convention, when they had some of the speakers come in, there was a number of them were from Minnesota,
Yes.
and strategically, there's a reason why, as you've just outlined for sure. It's very, very interesting. So whoever wins, when there is the changeover, what are those groups doing right now? Are they interviewing and lining up potentially like what their cabinet would look like, or does traditionally if Trump wins, does he just roll the same people over, or like what happens here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, with Trump, you never know. But, Sonny Perdue said, what was it, last week, that he was asked whether or not he would want to stay on in any second term. And he said yes.
Okay.
Now, that's going to be up to Trump. And if there were someone other than Sonny Perdue, who would it be? They're usually a governor, perhaps the, governor of South Dakota, the Nome, the Nichols, or I forget, Reynolds from Iowa. So you always look to the state governors to come in. On Biden's side, Tom Vilsack, former Secretary of Agriculture under Obama, his chief of staff, and eventually she became deputy secretary, is Krista Harden. So I think she would be near the top of the list for any potential Biden agriculture secretary. There are others on the list, like Michael Skuse, who was Undersecretary of Agriculture under Obama and comes from Delaware. Most people say he should be at the top of the list because he's from Delaware. So it's a parlor game we always play, but I want to see who the Treasury Secretary is, who's the State Department Secretary, who's going to be the U.S. Trade Rep, and who's going to head up EPA. I think those are, not that agriculture is not important. Agriculture usually, because of the diversity of U.S. agriculture, you almost have to have a little Democrat and a little Republican in you because of the diversity of not only voters, but the crops and livestock. So I think that's why agriculture in the past has been far more bipartisan than any other topic. But we've seen inroads against that the last few years.
I was reminded how old Biden is. As I've said to you, I'm reading this book, Reaganland, which is looking at 1976 to 1980, and I'm at like 1978, and Biden is referred to as a young but experienced senator from Delaware. It's like, oh my goodness, he is old. Wow.
Well, I'll use my own line I say in speeches: all great men are dead and I'm not well myself.
That's a T-shirt, Jim, right there. That's a T-shirt.
And as far as Biden, I was on AgriTalk. I was reticent to take Biden on for not being able to complete a sentence, and I said that, Shaun, because of his stuttering problem when he was a child.
Yeah.
I had a stuttering problem, and I know that you can grow yourself out of it. Take certain things that you can temper it. So I think by just showing up, lasting with Trump, I think he scored a lot of points with a lot of Americans that way. Myself, just on that basis.
Yeah, and Bill Walton, a famous stutter at a young age that turned into maybe one of the best color broadcasters from an auditory standpoint of a generation. So
you had to try harder.
Yeah, right. So so as we have about 30 days left, I believe, or just under. What are some of the key things, Jim, before we wrap up here, that you're watching and the audience needs to be looking out for in regards to this election?
With Trump, he's got to be able to go out and have his audiences again, because he lives and breathes that. He's a true politician in that regard. So that's one of the things. It only takes him about 2 weeks of that to get going. So that's going to be one that I really don't know whether or not he'll be able to. Two is whether or not Biden, if they have additional debates, whether or not Biden or Trump fouls up on any major issue. But whoever can capture that 8% to 11% truly independent voter, they're still on the sidelines. I don't think that the debate did them in one way or the other at all. So that means both candidates have to articulate what they want to do for the next 4 years without haranguing. They should look forward rather than backwards. And Biden has done more of that than Trump. And I think Trump's missing a good opportunity in that regard. Another thing I'm going to watch out on election night is the Black American vote. Trump got 8% of it last time. The Democrats, Hillary Clinton got under the percentage of Black Americans 40 years or under. Now, if Biden can get that vote, similar to Obama, he wins because strategic, number of states and electoral votes. Trump got 8% of the Black American vote. He's gearing for 11% or higher. If he were to get that, and some polls are showing that Black American males are starting to like him, not fervently, but beyond that 8% level. These are the dynamics at play with the demographics that we're seeing. Even the Hispanic vote is going more for Trump in certain counties.
Yeah, your comment about both of them spent way too much time looking back instead of looking forward. I agree. Ronald Reagan talked about hope. Obviously, Barack Obama brought, he was a great speaker, and he talked a lot about what the future could be. Even President Trump, going back to 2016, he won on what the future would be for Americans in terms of making it great again. So I think both need to find some groove and some phrases that help people think about the future, not just like arguing about things like Burisma and other issues from the past. I think it just wears people out.
Yeah, Americans are tired of the bitterness and the looking back. I remember one of the famous lines President Reagan has. I was a White House correspondent in those days and saw the presidents up front. And he was what you saw is what you got. He was an interesting person. And he always said revenge is an emotion, not a policy. And that speaks a lot right there. We've been into this revenge mode lately. Yeah, and it's need to get out of it. Hey, Jim, I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. We got to do this again. It was great chatting with you. I really, really do appreciate it. Anytime, Shaun.
That is Jim Wiesemeyer of Pro Farmer. If you're not a subscriber, check it out. Jim, how do they find it? Is it profarmer.com?
ProFarmer.com will get you there. Or my name, Jim Wiesemeyer, Wiesemeyer@gmail.com. Send me, if you have any particular questions that you were too timid to ask, even for a Canadian, just email me at my last name at gmail.com. And unlike most people from Washington, I won't tell you I'll have the answer, but I'll definitely comment.
I love it. Hey, I appreciate it, Jim. Jim Wiesemeyer, sure. A great friend. I really, really do appreciate him making some time here for us today. Hey, tomorrow on the show, I'm going to be out. I'm going to be leading, there's an election in Saskatchewan, and so we're having an ag leaders debate, and I am the moderator tomorrow, so I'm going to be out in Regina, Saskatchewan. So Kara Oosterhuis will be here hosting the show, and she's going to have Greg Sekulik of the Canola Council of Canada talk about your canola agronomic issues for sure. Hey, make sure you tune in to RealAg Radio today on Rural Radio 147 at 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. It's Agronomic Monday. We'll cover all the agronomic issues of the week. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll talk to you again later. Cheers, everybody.